The night I almost walked out of the office forever, my coworker placed a pool cue in my hand and made a challenge that changed my life. I had spent the entire day pretending I was fine, even though my heart was breaking behind a polite smile. I thought I was going to the bar after work just to forget my problems for an hour. I never imagined that one impossible shot would force me to face the feelings I had been hiding for months. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can heal a wounded heart and that sometimes a second chance arrives when we least expect it, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. My name was Emma, and for the past 6 months, my life had felt like a house slowly losing its lights, one room at a time. I was 29, worked as a project coordinator at a busy advertising company, and had become very good at saying, "I'm okay," when I was anything but okay. 3 months earlier, the man I had planned to marry had left me for someone else. There had been no dramatic fight, no warning, no final attempt to save what we had. He simply told me that he had changed and wanted a different life. The engagement ring disappeared into a drawer, our wedding plans were cancelled, and suddenly the future I had spent years imagining became a blank page. At work, I tried to keep everything professional. I arrived early, stayed late, answered emails, and smiled when people asked how I was doing. Most of my coworkers respected my privacy, but one person seemed to notice everything I tried to hide. His name was Daniel. He sat across from me, usually buried under spreadsheets and deadlines, but somehow he always knew when I had skipped lunch, when I was exhausted, or when I had spent an entire afternoon staring at the same sentence on my computer screen. Daniel never pushed me to talk. That was what made him different. He would simply leave a coffee beside my keyboard or quietly take care of a small task when he saw I was overwhelmed. Sometimes we joked about our impossible boss, sometimes we talked about movies, and sometimes we worked for hours without saying anything at all. I had begun to realize that I felt strangely safe around him, and that frightened me more than I wanted to admit. That Friday had been particularly terrible. I discovered that my former fiancé had gotten engaged again. Someone had posted the news online, and although I immediately closed the page, the image stayed in my mind. I went into the restroom, stared at myself in the mirror, and wondered why someone else's happiness still had the power to make me feel like a failure. When I returned to my desk, Daniel was waiting near the elevator. He looked at me for a moment and simply said that I needed to get out of the office. I tried to refuse, but he convinced me to join a few coworkers at a small neighborhood bar where they sometimes played pool. I almost said no again, but something inside me wanted one evening where I didn't have to be the woman whose heart had been broken. The bar was warm and dim, filled with soft music, laughter, and the quiet clack of billiard balls. For the first time in weeks, I actually smiled. Daniel noticed and smiled too. Eventually, the others left the pool table, and Daniel picked up a cue. He challenged me to a game, teasing me about how serious I looked. I told him I barely knew how to play. He said that made it more interesting. We laughed, and somehow the sadness inside me became lighter. I managed to sink a few easy balls, mostly by accident, and Daniel exaggerated his disappointment so dramatically that I couldn't stop laughing. Then he leaned against the table and made the challenge that I would remember for the rest of my life. He pointed toward the final ball and told me that if he sank it on his next shot, I owed him a kiss. I stared at him, surprised, while he immediately added that it was only a joke and that I could refuse if I wasn't comfortable. That small clarification mattered more than the challenge itself. He wasn't trying to take anything from me. He was simply giving me the choice. I smiled and told him that if he wanted that kiss, he would have to earn it. He carefully positioned the cue, took a breath, and struck the ball. It rolled across the green felt, touched the cushion, and slowly moved toward the pocket. For one heartbeat, I thought he had won. But at the very last second, the ball curved away and stopped. Daniel stared at the table in disbelief. I burst out laughing. He raised his hands and admitted defeat. Then, instead of trying to turn the moment into something awkward, he smiled and told me that perhaps he deserved a rematch someday. I remember that moment because something changed inside me. For the first time since my breakup, I wasn't thinking about the man who had left me. I was thinking about the man standing in front of me. But the night didn't end there. As we walked outside, Daniel became unusually quiet. Under the streetlights, he finally told me the truth. He had noticed my pain because he understood it. 2 years earlier, his younger brother had died unexpectedly. Daniel had spent months pretending he was strong because everyone around him expected him to be. He told me that grief had taught him something important. Sometimes people don't need advice, solutions, or promises. Sometimes they simply need someone willing to sit beside them while the pain passes. Then he admitted that he had started caring about me long before that night. He had never said anything because he knew I was healing, and he didn't want to become another person asking something from me when I had already given too much of myself away. I stood there silently, realizing that the kiss challenge had never really been about a kiss. It had been about trust. Weeks passed, and our friendship slowly became something deeper. There were no grand declarations, no sudden promises, and no attempt to erase the past. Daniel simply kept showing up. When I had a bad day, he listened. When I succeeded, he celebrated. When I doubted myself, he reminded me that being abandoned did not mean I was unworthy of love. One evening, months after that pool game, we returned to the same bar. Daniel picked up a cue and looked at me with that familiar smile. This time, I challenged him. I told him that if I sank the final ball, he owed me a kiss. He laughed and agreed. I took the shot. The ball rolled slowly across the table, touched the cushion, and disappeared into the pocket. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Daniel smiled and asked if I was sure. I stepped closer and told him that this time, I was choosing it. The kiss was gentle, brief, and nothing like the dramatic moments I had once imagined love would be. But it meant everything because I wasn't kissing him to prove I had moved on from someone else. I was kissing him because I had finally learned that love wasn't supposed to make me feel afraid, small, or replaceable. A year later, that same pool table became part of one of the happiest memories of my life. Daniel and I had built something slowly, carefully, and honestly. We still argued about who was better at pool. He still claimed that his first missed shot had been intentional. I still refused to believe him. And sometimes, when life became difficult, we returned to that little bar and played a game together. Not because we needed to escape our problems, but because we remembered where we had learned that healing doesn't always arrive with a miracle. Sometimes it arrives as a cup of coffee left quietly beside your computer. Sometimes it is a person who waits patiently without demanding anything. And sometimes, it is a silly pool challenge that begins with a joke and ends with two wounded hearts discovering that they can trust again. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes one small act of kindness can remind someone that their story isn't over yet. And before you go, leave one special comment: I still believe in second chances. Because sometimes the person who changes your life doesn't arrive when everything is perfect. Sometimes they arrive when you're broken, sit beside you in the darkness, and quietly remind you that tomorrow is still worth believing in.